On December 28, 1937, 4 airplanes were on a diplomatic mission sent by Dominican dictator Rafael Trujillo in honor of Christopher Columbus. Only one ever returned. Alright, so here's the story. In the early 1900s, all Latin American nations got together to discuss their future in the 20th century. And when political figureheads get together to talk about stuff, they first spend quite some time patting each other's backs for how awesome they all are and handing out awards to each other. So they figured they should thank the one awesome guy who made Latin America possible in the first place, Christopher Columbus. And they decided he deserved not just an award, but a monument.
By 1923, Latin American nations had agreed that the monument in honor of their founder and benefactor, yeah, I use the term loosely, should be a joint project by all the countries of the Americas and should also be paid by all. It was also agreed that it should be built in Santo Domingo. Now, the idea to build Columbus a lighthouse surfaced sometimes around the late 1800s. You know, back then when everybody still thought that Christopher Columbus was one cool dude and heck, let's honor him with a giant lump of concrete. A design competition was launched and over 455 designs from all over the world entered. Some were pretty cool, like this one here from the Soviet Union by Konstantin Melnikov. Wait, where have I seen this design before? In 1931, the winner was picked, 23-year-old Joseph Lee Gleave. I hope I'm not butchering that name, from Scotland. He was chosen as the designated architect by a committee that included Frank Lloyd Wright.
I mean, Frank, really? I mean, you had hundreds and hundreds of designs to choose from. We could have had this in Santo Domingo instead of in Gotham City. Santo Domingo could have been Gotham City.
Well, a few more years of preparations went by and it was 1937. But nobody so far had forked over any cash. So the much beloved Presidente Rafael Trujillo hatched a, as he thought, brilliant plan to get all the countries to cough up the money that they had promised. He would beg. You see, it was the 1930s. Airplanes were all the rage. Lindbergh had done his famous New York to Paris flight just a few years earlier. Amelia Earhart had just gone missing a few months before. Howard Hughes had broken records crossing from Los Angeles to New York, and the Russians, well, they had gone over the North Pole. But the Spanish-speaking world didn't want to be left behind in all the airplane record craze. The plane Cuatro Vientos broke records by flying from Spain all the way to Cuba, and inspired by that feat, a Spanish-born Cuban, Mendez flew alone in an open cockpit from Havana to Sevilla, becoming the first Latin American to cross the Atlantic. So with planes being the in thing right now, why not have a squadron of planes do a Latin America round trip to call attention to the worthy cause of building a giant lump of concrete? I'm sorry, am I sounding a little bit too sarcastic? So, Trujillo calls up his good buddy in Cuba, Fulgencio Batista, the ruler of Cuba, to get together and plan the scheme. I mean, of course, it was President Federico Laredo Bru, because Batista wasn't running the country yet, officially. I admit that nobody really knows whose idea it was. All the historical documents say something along the lines of the Cuban and the Dominican governments planned the whole thing. It just seems like the kind of thing that Trujillo would come up with, right? The Cuban and the Dominican governments planned the trip and they called it the Vuelo Panamericano. It was also referred to as the Pro Faro a Colón flight, an event that would go down in Latin American history. No pun intended. The Cubans donated 3 airplanes and the Dominican Republic 1. The Cubans also donated Mendez, the guy who had become the first transatlantic Latin American. He would fly one of the planes and be the squadron's navigator. They christened the planes. Are you ready for this? Santa Maria, La Niña, and La Pinta, and La Colón. The leaders of the mission was the Dominican Frank Félix Miranda, a shining aviation hero to the Dominicans in his own right. On November 12, 1937, the 4 planes took off from Miraflores Airport in Santo Domingo. They had 53 stops planned along the route. Everywhere the Cubans and Dominicans went, they received a hero's welcome. They were paraded and dined and wined, and everywhere they went, they handed out letters and greetings and were promised the money for the monument. Now, rumor has it that they were given presents in return, gold and stuff like that. So the planes were getting heavier. Now, there's no proof of that this really happened, but we'll get back to the heavy plane issue a little bit later. Now, on the next leg, from La Paz to Lima, something happened. La Niña vanished from the formation in a thick fog. The others circled around trying to find the plane, but to no avail. So they continued on to Lima and landed there. Almost 2 days later, radio contact was established with La Niña. The crew had made an emergency landing, but it was totally fine. Ooh, that could have ended in a disaster. I mean, could you imagine what would have happened if those planes would have crashed? Yeah. Reunited, the squadron flew from Lima to Cali, Colombia. It was now a month since they had taken off from Santo Domingo. They were not yet halfway through the trip. The night before the flight, the Cuban and Dominican flyers enjoyed the hospitality of Cali with a massive banquet given to them by the city of Cali and the Colombian Air Force. During the banquet, a large black butterfly was seen flying around the banquet hall. Taking off from Cali the following day, the planes turned towards the Cali River, intending to fly along it until they came out on the other side. You see, Cali is a city high in the mountains, surrounded by even higher mountains. And the Colombians, knowing the terrain, suggested a particular complex but safe route to the Pacific. Now, the Cubans decided against it because they were on a time crunch. They had somewhere to go. Now, the Dominican plane, on the other hand, could fly high and far over the mountains, leaving the Cubans far below them. The Dominican plane, the Colón, landed safely in Panama. This time there was no celebration, no parades. And it was here that flight leader Frank Félix Miranda was informed by reporters that the other 3 planes had gone down. You see, the entire mountain range around Cali is populated, so there were eyewitness accounts of what actually happened. The planes were flying so low along the Cali River, a few of the farmers even tried to signal them to go higher, fearing they might crash into the Felidia church tower down the river. Now, why they flew so low is hard to say. Maybe they were too heavy to go higher, possibly due to their full fuel tanks or all the gold? At one point in a particular nasty bend in the river around Las Nieves, near the tiny village of Felidia, Peláez decided it was too much and pulled the plane around. Maybe he was trying to turn around entirely, maybe just evade a bend. We'll never really know. Either way, the others followed suit, trying to stay in formation. In the narrow river canyon, only a few feet off the treetops, the planes lost control, having literally no place to go. That day, all 7 flyers died, with only the Dominican plane surviving. The vuelo panamericano had come to a violent and fiery end. Rescuers found the bodies of the flyers, and there were rumors of farmers finding some of the gold. Nobody really knows for sure anymore. We do know that the nearby village of Felidia showed a solidarity to Cuba that was reciprocated by Batista. For their help in recovering the bodies, maybe the money, Batista later donated a school and a statue of a virgin that became the town's patron saint. Now, to this day, there are ties between Felidia and Cuba, with Felidia holding Cuban-themed festivals. In 2015, a small monument was erected in the Felidia Park in memory of the Cuban flyers. The only survivors of the disaster, the Dominican flyer, Frank Félix Miranda, and his mechanic, received a sort of hero's welcome on their return to Santo Domingo. They and their plane returned by boat. There's now a street named after Frank Feliz Miranda in Santo Domingo, but probably mostly due to his accomplishments for the Dominican aviation in general. While it was a big deal in Latin America, the event was overshadowed by other global events of that year. North America, for instance, was still mourning Amelia Earhart, as well as the Hindenburg, the Spanish Civil War, and the Sino-Japanese War that were making headlines as the marvelous invention airplane was turning into a game-changing war machine.
There is something fantastic about these sheets of fire that flash from the bursts of high explosive far below.
And, of course, the world realized at about the same time that Hitler guy, well, he meant business. In the following months and then years, the world crashed and burned into World War II. And the vuelo panamericano was pretty much forgotten. Now, with the disaster, the plans for the Columbus Monument came to a standstill. Nobody really wanted to build it anymore. Only a meager $15,000 were collected by 1950. It wasn't until 1986 that the Dominican Republic decided to finally build the monument. And guided by its blind president, Joaquin Balaguer, one of the last to have actually witnessed the events surrounding the vuelo panamericano, everyone else involved, including the architect, had already died. All we have left now is this big monument, a lump of concrete, shaped like a cross-like pyramid that stands as a cold testament to the many lives its construction cost. Oh yeah, and to celebrate this Columbus guy,
Abul, que lo que? Thanks for watching this new episode of Kiskeya.Life History Facts. Oh, right, but one moment. Okay, that's better, right? Sorry if I sound a little bit sarcastic about the monument. There's a lot of controversy around it. Some think it's really amazing, some think it's hideous. You know what? If you ever get a chance, you definitely need to go check it out and form your own opinion. And plus, you get to see Christopher Columbus's grave. Well, one of his many graves. Now, we'd love to do more episodes like these, tell a bit more about history, have animations and videos in it, but these take a long time to do. And so here's something that we did now. We opened our own Patreon page. So head on over to our Patreon page. We're going to put the link here as well. We're going to try to have some cool perks for all the Patreons, one of which is deciding what the next episodes are going to be about. There's a lot that we want to talk about, but you could maybe help us decide what it is that we will be doing. So check out our Patreon page. Plus, you'll be able to see my wife more often in the videos as well. Right, honey? Not to mention the kitties. The kitties will show up more often. And one other way to help us out is simply watch our videos. Pass it on. Tell your friends about it. Subscribe. Like. Maybe then over time we'll be able to do more videos. Oh yeah, and here's a preview of the next episode.
So how do you get from the Dominican Republic to Haiti? Seems kind of simple. It's not.
Look, all these people, they want to see more of you. And, if they help us with making these videos more awesome, then they will see more of you, right? Look how excited he is.
Yes, I'd be really excited if you'd help us out. Yay!
That's not his real voice. His real voice is more like Morgan Freeman kind of a voice. Blah.
People die every day, Frankie.
What?